On the surface, the Detroit River is a busy, modern waterway, but beneath that surface swims an ancient link to our prehistoric past, the sturgeon.
There's nothing else like them in the Great Lakes.
They've been called a dinosaur fish, a living fossil, a fish of wisdom. Sturgeon are the great fish of the Great Lakes, the largest stretching up to 7 feet. They're also the longest living. Females can live for 100 years and beyond. But there's something more.
It's hard to describe. They're unique. You look a sturgeon in the eye and you can kind of get a sense that they're looking back at you and thinking about you as much as you're thinking about them.
Sturgeon were swimming around millions of years before the Great Lakes were even lakes. They were roaming the oceans before T-Rex roamed the earth. And they survived when the dinosaurs could not. But sturgeon nearly met their match in a much smaller foe, humans.
In Lake Michigan alone, there are over 1 million lake sturgeon, and now there's less than 1,000.
The numbers are historically at about a 1% of what the traditional population was. Sturgeon are almost never seen by most people. Most people have never seen one, never got the chance to.
And that's a problem, because once people get to know the sturgeon,
people love sturgeon, they're enamored with the sturgeon, they're unique, they're funny, they're weird looking.
they're not cuddly, but they are ours, and losing the sturgeon would leave a hole in the Great Lakes ecosystem. This fish tale as old as time isn't over yet, and the next chapter, well, it's up to us. Let's dive in and meet the people dedicated to saving our sturgeon.
Today it's about everything sturgeon.
You guys can touch it if you want.
It's like a baby shark.
It's camera shy. Feel back here, it's really soft back there. It's almost like sandpaper, but soft.
One of the first questions that we get are those sharks? You know, what are those? They look like sharks.
As the educational programmer for the Department of Natural Resources Outdoor Adventure Center, Natalie Seifer loves sharing her affection for these special fish.
We do sometimes talk about lake sturgeon as being the dinosaurs of the Detroit River or the dinosaurs of the Great Lakes. Kids love dinosaurs, and I think making that dinosaur connection with our lake sturgeon and that, you know what, these aren't dinosaurs, but they were on the planet when dinosaurs were here. I think that does create some excitement for the kiddos that we see.
But unlike the dinosaurs, sturgeon are still here.
The opportunity to see them up close, even touch them, makes that connection that this is an iconic species here in the Detroit River, right in their backyard.
It kind of felt a little bit slimy.
One of the children getting up close and personal with the sturgeon is 11-year-old Tara Whittico, an aspiring sturgeon whisperer.
A sturgeon, she decided it was her favorite fish.
Kind of find them just a little bit cute. My dream is to catch a sturgeon.
Today, she's happy just to pet one.
On the head, it's kind of like an armored fish. Imagine a dinosaur feeling wet.
That armor, called scutes, is a tie to the sturgeon's ancient past.
There are 5 rows of scutes, which are bony plates. Those are there to protect the fish. They are armor. They look like what would have been here millions of years ago.
The scutes wear off as the sturgeon grows larger, when they're no longer needed for protection. Sturgeon don't have teeth. Instead, they use their vacuum-like mouth to suck up food from the lake bottom. What's on the menu? A mix of snails, leeches, worms, clams, insects, small fish, and plants. Sturgeon also have funny whisker-like sensors called barbels. They help locate food in murky water and give sturgeon that distinctive, some might say, distinguished look. Justin Chiat is a fish biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. He's worked with sturgeon for the past 20 years.
They're a threatened species in the state of Michigan, and they're actually pretty rare throughout the Great Lakes in general. So what we're trying to do today is tell people all about all the restoration efforts that are taking place throughout the Great Lakes to restore sturgeon, to bring them back into higher levels.
The Great Lakes were once filled with millions of sturgeon. They were an important fish to the indigenous people, revered both culturally and as a critical source of food after a long winter. But as commercial fishing grew, fishermen began to hate the sturgeon because their sharp scoots ripped their fishing nets.
Initially, they were considered a nuisance species and they would be caught in fishermen's nets, and some of those fish would then just be thrown up on the banks because they just wanted to get rid of them so they didn't get tangled up in the nets.
Some of the sturgeon were burned as fuel for steamships, stacked like firewood on the shore. But that all changed in the 1860s with the growing popularity of caviar and smoked sturgeon. Sturgeon eggs became a highly valuable, sought-after delicacy. In 1885, more than 8 million pounds of sturgeon were harvested, and by the early 1900s, the sturgeon were in trouble. Reckless overfishing had wiped out vast numbers of fish, and the remaining sturgeon faced new obstacles to survival.
Sturgeon, like many other fish species, move up rivers to spawn. And in a lot of those river systems, there have been dams placed in those rivers that block sturgeon migrations to historic spawning areas. And so now they don't have access to that good spawning habitat.
Dams and pollution made it increasingly difficult for sturgeon to release and fertilize their eggs, putting the next generations in real jeopardy. Their numbers continued to decline, and it looked as though sturgeon too might go the way of the dinosaurs. But the species that put the sturgeon in peril was about to hatch a new plan, this time for preservation. About 4 hours north of Detroit at Black Lake, the sturgeon are counting on the help of humans. And today, it's time to be counted.
We are lifting one of two of our nets that we usually put out each day. Each net is 1,200 feet long.
A team of researchers is conducting a 3-week-long effort to count the juvenile sturgeon in Black Lake. It's been 10 years since the last count. Underwater, the nets look like this. They're designed to catch sturgeon about 5 to 15 years old.
There's a float line and a lead line so that the net fishes all 10 feet of the water column.
Once a fish is on board, they free it from the net as quickly as possible, then into a holding tank. They record the sturgeon's length and girth.
Hey, we got 26.9.
Each fish is scanned for a tracking tag.
So each fish will get a pit tag, so it's the same thing as like a microchip in a dog. So if we've caught this fish before, it'll pop up on here.
This sturgeon does have a number.
We're able to track its life history through that unique ID number. So any fish that we catch that doesn't have a tag, we will tag it. And if it does have a tag, we will write that down and figure out how old that fish is and where, if it was stocked, if it was naturally produced.
Stocked fish are those raised in hatcheries and released into the lake. Researchers also take a small sample from each fish's tail fin for genetic testing back in the lab.
We'll be able to tell between male or female at a younger size and also just their genetics history. So which families of sturgeon are basically most successful.
After that, the sturgeon is released back into the lake. It is a painstaking process, but one that's critical to managing the population of this precious resource. Ed Baker is a research biologist with the Michigan DNR Fish Division.
It was in the mid-1990s that the Fisheries Division of DNR started working on a restoration and management plan for sturgeon, and that's when things started really picking up in terms of the interest around sturgeon.
It's become the ultimate team effort.
We've developed a really outstanding partnership here with Michigan State University, Sturgeon for Tomorrow, the Little Traverse Bay Band, and other tribes in the area are all involved in the co-management here.
Baker says there's just something different about sturgeon.
It's hard to describe. They're unique. There's nothing else like them in the Great Lakes. You look a sturgeon in the eye and you can kind of get a sense that they're looking back at you and thinking about you as much as you're thinking about them.
Raising the public profile of this fascinating fish is key to their survival.
The same reason we care about bald eagles and blue whales. I mean, we are the dominant species on the planet in terms of our impacts. One of the impacts we have is, we tend to drive species towards extinction.
Sturgeon are at a disadvantage when it comes to saving themselves. Females can't reproduce until they're around 22 years old. Males around 15. That's an eternity in the fish world. And they don't reproduce every year.
When a female does reach maturity, she spawns once every 3 to 5 years. So their reproductive rate is very slow. They're not like a bluegill that can rebuild its population in a couple of years. We started stocking the Black River in 2000. We're just now starting to see some of those fish from the early 2000s coming back as spawning adults. If we're looking at a 2 to 3 or 4 generation effort, we're looking at 80 years of work to try and bring these fish back.
It's a commitment they plan to keep.
It fits in pretty nicely with Anishinaabe culture, where the mentality is preserving things for the next 7 generations.
Gary Michaud is the inland fisheries biologist for the Little Traverse Bay bands of Odawa Indians.
My position is centered around restoration of those species that are most important both for food and both culturally for Anishinaabe people. It was said that once upon a time you could walk across a river during the sturgeon spawn season, that there were so many in the river. So they were really important for Anishinaabe people during that time of year in the spring. So just coming out of winter, you need a food source, right? And so they were often the first available food source to them after their winter.
Now that connection is helping save the sturgeon.
We have a relationship with this fish, right? So what you want to do is become a better steward, and that's why we do what we do. So each time we come out and collect fish, that's kind of what's in the back of my mind, is that yes, they were in a bad spot, but a lot of good work has been done, and the torch needs to kind of continue to be passed.
The desire to save the sturgeon runs deep in these waters.
We've got a long heritage of family sturgeon fishermen, in our area, and so we all got together and decided that we needed to protect this for our future, for our children, for our grandchildren, and for everybody else to enjoy.
Jay Woderski is the president of the Black Lake chapter of Sturgeon for Tomorrow.
Sturgeon for Tomorrow was formed back in 1999 as a group of just local fishermen who were about to be cut off from fishing.
The nonprofit group is dedicated to supporting efforts to restore the sturgeon population, and each spring they form a sturgeon guard to keep a watchful eye out for poachers as the fish swim upriver to spawn. It's not just the fish they're trying to protect, but a sport fishing tradition that stretches back generations.
My grandfather, Bob, participated originally, and my dad, James, and then now myself and my son, Jason. We all are part of the heritage.
Each winter, fishermen would gather to try and spear sturgeon through the ice.
Originally back in like 1947, 1948, when they first opened this up, anybody that wanted to could fish.
Back then, each person could legally catch 3 sturgeon a year. Not that it was easy.
Patiently wait. See one swim by and throw the spear and hope you're lucky enough or good enough to hit it.
As the sturgeon dwindled in numbers, that tradition changed. Now each February, Black Lake is home to Michigan's shortest fishing season. Currently, just 1.2% of the adult sturgeons in Black Lake can be caught each year, and that's not a lot of fish to go around.
For the last several years, that has been a total of 14 fish annually that we allow harvest on. That 14 fish is evenly split between state licensed fishers and the 5 tribes that we work with.
In 2022, it took just 36 minutes for anglers to reach the limit. In 2023, the season lasted a full 78 minutes. Short as it is, it's a time-honored tradition.
The tradition is just, it would be sad to lose that for so many families around here that have had that heritage. The more people learn about sturgeon, the better off we are to protect them.
Many of the young fish in the Black Lake system were raised here under the watchful eye of Doug Larson.
I tell people all the time, I have the weirdest but coolest job in the world.
Larson manages the sturgeon hatchery and field projects for Michigan State University. This sturgeon nursery of sorts is also a research facility.
This is arguably one of the best studied populations of lake sturgeon in the United States and perhaps of all sturgeons worldwide.
On this day, the hatchery was home to about 3,200 fish.
This is a juvenile lake sturgeon, roughly 5 inches long. This fish has already received a pit tag for the year and is set to be released this week.
These fish were all collected at the larva stage in the Black Lake River.
We actually catch the naturally produced fish So we do that by deploying nets downstream of the spawning areas about 3 weeks or so after our first sign of spawn. And we'll catch the larvae that are naturally produced by pairings in the river.
Those first months are a perilous time to be a sturgeon.
Just about everything in this system that can eat larval sturgeon will eat larval sturgeon.
In the hatchery, safe from predators, the sturgeon can grow and develop their distinctive defense mechanism.
At this size, they're pretty well able to avoid predators. They have these sharp scutes that they use as a predator defense. A different coloration helps sturgeon avoid predators. They spend a lot of time in sandy areas at this point, so this will help them camouflage.
When the fish are about 5 to 6 inches long, roughly around 3 months, they're ready to be released.
We can take a survivability that might be, something in the range of 1/100th of 1% or 1/1000th of 1%, and we can range it up to 50 to 70% every year. Here.
It's a passion Larson is sharing with his 11-year-old son, Henry.
It's fun for me. My son gets to come out. We like fishing, obviously, as anglers, but he also gets to come out and see that management side, so he really appreciates full scale what it's like to take a fish from, angler all the way back to restoration.
So what's it like to pull up a sturgeon?
It's just an exciting feeling, and the net is actually very heavy and insanely long.
And he cautions, you have to watch out for those scutes.
It's a spiky area on their back that if you touch it, it's insanely sharp and it will cut you. And the skin is a little bit slimy, but that's with most fish.
Henry sees a lot of purpose in the work his dad is doing.
I think they're an interesting fish, and that they really should not be as hunted as much as they were or still are. I don't think they should be able to be hunted at all.
That interest is critical to securing the sturgeon's future.
It's important because we get to bring that next generation in and really teach them and hopefully inspire them to join this field as well.
One of those efforts is called Sturgeon in the Classroom.
Some of the fish that we raise in this facility will actually be placed into different classrooms around Michigan. The classrooms will raise the fish until next May, and then we see those fish return.
Those fish are then tagged and released.
Indian River is a school that's local here, and they raised the fish in 2018 named Armor.
This was Armor being released in 2018. The team was thrilled to recapture Armor during the count.
We got to report to those folks, hey, the fish that your class raised that you had for 8 months of its life cycle is thriving in Black River and is going to contribute to this population someday.
A population being brought back, one fish at a time. Two of the fish from Black Lake River live here at the Belle Isle Aquarium. As the nation's oldest public aquarium, it's a fitting home for this ancient fish. Paul Shewart is the curator.
People like to hear about them, people like to see them. We like to be able to show people what's out there in their environment and what we're trying to protect.
It's a comeback story that is still being written.
It's a really important fish for Great Lakes. They're starting to make a comeback. And there's been a lot of projects around the Detroit River. They've installed offshore reefs. There's about 14 acres of limestone off of Belle Isle that was put in just for spawning for sturgeon.
An investment not only in the sturgeon, but the health of the entire ecosystem.
It's kind of our job to help preserve ecosystems for the future. We've talked about invasive species in the Great Lakes over the years. They will change things, and we think if we can get sturgeon back, it'll help, stabilize the environment.
While the sturgeon may not be the flashiest fish in the tanks, they manage to charm guests of all ages.
Sturgeon have made it through the millennia, so they're kind of iconic. My favorite part of being here is talking to the kids and answering questions about it, because it gives them a window into the rest of the world.
A window to a fish of the past and hopefully the future.
Every species of fish in the Great Lakes is part of a larger ecosystem, and when one's missing, other things suffer from it. I think it's just very important that they see them and see what they look like. I mean, they can get up to 800 pounds live 100 years old, so they're a very important species. And this might be the only place, you know, around you can see them. And they look a little bit fossil-like, primitive fish. Even though they can live over 100 years, they persevere through the millennium. Humans have almost exterminated them from the lakes, but they're still coming back.
Back on the Detroit River, the efforts are paying off.
We estimate that there's about 6,000 adult sturgeon in the Detroit River.
And that number is about to grow by 2.
We've had these sturgeon for about 3 years. We got them in the fall of 2019. And at that time, they were about a year old.
Named iron and copper for 2 minerals mined in Michigan, these 2 have served as ambassadors at the DNR's Outdoor Adventure Center.
They have a 150-gallon tank in our classroom, and so when students come to do programs there, they're able to see them, the public is able to see them.
But today is graduation day.
Today is their big day of being released into the Detroit River.
Iron and copper are tagged and wheeled to the river. It is a moving day for the people who've raised them.
Bittersweet for sure. I'm gonna miss them.
Grab them underneath there, really strong by the tail right there. Okay. Like this is an aquarium.
Oh, really? Look at that.
It's a devotion and commitment to the future of this fish.
Be strong, okay?
Okay, we're gonna put them down.
Bye, buddy.
There we go. They can live for so long. They can outlive me. They could be in this Detroit River 100 years from now.
For not just today's children, but their children's grandchildren.
And it just felt good to release it back in the wild. Kind of felt encouraging and gives you hope that the species will live on.
The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service recently decided to keep lake sturgeon off the endangered species list. The agency cited the success of ongoing efforts to save them, including those here in Michigan. But their future is far from guaranteed. So, how can you help save our sturgeon? For starters, support efforts to keep our Great Lakes clean. Don't eat sturgeon meat or caviar. Follow Michigan's laws about when and where sturgeon can be caught and size restrictions. If you accidentally catch a sturgeon, release it as quickly as possible and report any sturgeon poaching to the Michigan DNR. Support or volunteer with an organization like Sturgeon for Tomorrow to help protect these magnificent fish. And finally, help spread the word. The more people who appreciate our sturgeon, the more likely these fish are to still be swimming here for generations to come.